Somewhere right now, there is a man who has followed one artist for over 20 years. He has memorized every album, stood in line for every tour. He can name the exact date of a concert in a city he never even visited, quote interviews from a decade ago, recognize a B-side track within 3 notes. And if that artist walked past him tomorrow on a sidewalk, close enough to touch, there would be no flicker of recognition. Not a nod, not a pause, just one stranger passing another as if 20 years of devotion had never happened at all. That image should unsettle you more than it does, because this isn't really about music. It's the quiet mechanism hiding inside a sentence Jesus spoke near the end of his most famous sermon. A sentence that has almost nothing to do with unbelievers, and everything to do with people who spent their whole lives serving him. So here is the real question, the one most people never say out loud because it feels like betrayal. Does Jesus actually know you, or do you simply know a great deal about him? You go to church most weeks. You've prayed more times than you could count. Maybe you've served on a team, given money, taught a class, sat in a small group circle answering honestly when it was your turn. Maybe you've raised your hands in worship without faking a single second of it. None of that is being questioned here. But somewhere underneath all of it, quietly, in the part of you that doesn't perform for anyone, that question keeps surfacing anyway. It's the exact question Jesus answers with a sentence colder than almost anything else he ever said. Many will say to me on that day, "Lord, Lord," and I will tell them plainly, "I never knew you." Not "I forgot you." Not "you disappointed me." I never knew you, spoken to people who prophesied in his name, who healed in his name, who did mighty works in his name. Religious professionals by every visible measure, and still, somehow, strangers. Here is what almost nobody explains about that verse, and it changes everything once you see it. The word Jesus uses for know was never about information. In Scripture, this kind of knowing meant covenant intimacy, the closeness reserved for a husband and a wife, not a fan and a stage. Which means there is a very ordinary, very unremarkable way a person can spend an entire lifetime near Jesus, inside his house, doing his work, and still remain structurally unknown to him. And here's the uncomfortable part. Nothing about that requires scandal or secret sin or obvious hypocrisy. It only requires one very human substitution, replacing relationship with proximity. Standing close to something for so long that familiarity with it starts to feel like intimacy with it. That substitution never announces itself with a moment you could point to later. It builds quietly, service by service, routine by routine, Sunday folded into Sunday, until decades have passed and a person is fluent in the language of faith while remaining, underneath the fluency, functionally unknown. Go back to the fan for a second. He isn't lying when he says he knows the artist. In one sense, he knows him better than most people ever will, the history, the catalog, the details even close friends might forget. But there's a door backstage, and behind that door isn't a test of how much someone knows. It's a very short list of names the artist actually recognizes on sight, without needing an introduction. Everyone else stops at the rope, credentials or not, no matter how devoted, no matter how many years, no matter how much was spent getting close to the building where it all happens. Religion has its own version of that rope, and its own version of a badge that gets you close without ever getting you known. Attendance is a badge. Service is a badge. Even spiritual gifting can become a badge, something that grants access to the platform without ever granting access to the person the platform is supposed to be about. It's entirely possible to stay on the correct side of every visible line for a lifetime while never once walking through the door behind it. The people in that passage weren't outside the venue, standing in a parking lot. They had access to the stage. They had prophesied. They had delivered people from real bondage. And Jesus still says, "I never knew you." Which forces a harder question than, am I doing enough? The real question becomes, Is your faith built around proximity to Jesus or intimacy with him? Proximity can be measured hours served, sermons heard, verses memorized, years on the roster. Intimacy can't be measured that way at all. It can only be tested one way: whether you actually know him when nothing is being performed, when there's no crowd to notice and no metric being kept. Whether the relationship survives in the silence, off the platform, away from the service, when there's no song to sing and no work to point to as proof. Notice how differently a devoted fan and an actual friend behave. The fan performs for the artist, even from a distance, always slightly on display, always aware of being watched, even when the artist isn't watching at all. A friend doesn't perform. A friend simply is in the room, unguarded, known before a single impressive thing is said. If your entire spiritual life only exists in the performance, the worship set, the service project, the public identity everyone else sees, and it goes quiet the moment no one is watching, that silence is telling you something the noise never could. Here is where this stops being frightening and becomes strangely merciful, because Jesus isn't condemning effort in this passage. He's exposing a substitution, and a substitution, unlike a verdict, can still be corrected while there's time. The tragedy was never that these people worked. It's that the work became the relationship instead of the evidence of one. Real intimacy with Christ was never meant to be replaced by service to him. It was meant to produce it, the way genuine love produces action without needing to be forced into it. Knowing him first, serving him because of it, never instead of it, and never as a quiet substitute for it. It's worth being precise here, because this passage is often misunderstood as a warning about losing salvation. It isn't. Jesus never says these people once belonged to him and fell away. He says he never knew them, which means the danger isn't a relationship that decayed. It's a relationship that was never actually formed in the first place, hidden underneath decades of activity that looked, from every angle, like evidence of one. This is where it becomes personal, because no one else can check the list for you. Not a pastor, not a program, not a certificate of membership hanging somewhere in a church office. The unsettling privilege, and it is a privilege, is that you get to ask this honestly today, before the moment arrives when the answer is no longer yours to discover. Because the detail that should sit with you longest isn't the rejection itself, it's the timing. This isn't a midlife revelation you get to quietly correct over the following years. It's a courtroom revelation. It arrives at the one point in existence when appeal is no longer possible, when the list is already closed and the door behind it has already been decided. Let that sit for a second, uncomfortably, the way it's meant to, not to produce despair, because despair was never the goal of that passage, and it was never Christ's intention toward you personally. But comfort placed in the wrong thing is worse than discomfort placed in the right one. A performer who believes proximity is intimacy will feel perfectly safe right up, until the moment safety was never actually available to him. Because here is the staggering mercy hidden inside this warning. The door backstage was never locked from his side. Christ himself said, in the same breath he used the language of shepherd and flock. I know my own, and my own know me. The same relational knowing Matthew 7 withholds, offered freely here to anyone willing to stop performing at a distance and actually come near. The fan doesn't need decades of credentials to become known. He needs to stop settling for proximity as if it were the relationship itself. The gap Jesus warns about is real, but it isn't fixed, and it isn't reserved for people who haven't tried hard enough. It closes the moment religious activity stops functioning as a substitute for relationship and starts functioning as its fruit instead. So the shift isn't complicated, even if it isn't easy, and it doesn't require abandoning any of the service you've already given. It's simply the difference between rehearsing facts about Jesus and sitting in silence with him until he's no longer a subject you study, but a person who actually knows you back. who recognizes you the way a friend recognizes a friend, not the way a gatekeeper checks a name off a list. That shift changes everything downstream. How you pray when no one taught you the words, why you serve once the applause is gone, what happens in the parts of your faith no one else will ever see or measure. Because on that day, the question won't be how much you did in His name, how long you served, or how impressive the list of works became. It will be a single, quieter question, whether He recognizes your face. And the strange comfort hidden inside that is this: recognition was never earned through performance in the first place. It's built through nearness, patiently, in the ordinary and unrecorded hours. Which means the most important work available to you today has nothing to do with any stage, and everything to do with the quiet minutes where no one is watching, except the one whose recognition is the only one that will still matter when every other stage in this life has gone dark. If this put words to something you felt but never said out loud, stay close to this channel. This is exactly the kind of clarity we return to, not alarm, not speculation, just scripture held up honestly against the moment we're actually living in, one honest question at a time.